Welcome, my future YouTubers. Rose of Dawn has an issue with Contrapoints, as she has for quite a while. Contra's latest video was pretty fucking dope, so let's see what Rose of Dawn has to say with it. So, Ms. Dawn, take it away.
I've been making YouTube videos fairly consistently now for over 2 years. It's been a wholly rewarding experience, particularly as my channel exploded in popularity over the last year to a level I never expected. I found many messages of support and made friends with people who I've looked up to for the longest time. Now, with a sudden surge in my status, it's only natural that I attract my own fair share of critics, and whilst that's certainly been the case with me, at the same time I've also been able to avoid YouTube drama, something common with most, if not all, channels that gain some sort of following. This is particularly surprising given the type of content I make, which is political in nature and heavily critical of an ideology coming from the so-called transgender community. Frankly, I'd rather avoid the mudslinging and sniping of YouTube drama as much as possible, as I'd rather focus my time and energy on content and issues that I find
But we need to hear her arguments in order to rebut them, so yeah.
personally interesting. Times are changing though, and recently I've started to gain the attention of content creators who command a significantly larger audience than I do. As an example, Cat Black, one of the more influential trans creators on this platform, recently responded to a video I made on the subject of femboys. I found her response mostly respectful, if wildly off the mark, but
So here's my big issue with this conversation. Who are these trans activists and what activism have they done? Are they simply people who claim to be trans, hiding behind anime avatars on Twitter? Who exactly are the activists telling tomboys they're actually trans? Are they people who, upon looking back at their own lives, where they identified as tomboys and part of that was them figuring themselves out, just putting a voice to that particular narrative? Yeah, I actually did the femboy video here on stream a few weeks ago. And yeah, these are basically the points I raised. What proof do you have that these people are trans, and what proof do you have that they aren't just seeing actions or behaviors in these other people that they did themselves? I don't think anyone gets to tell anyone who they are, I agree, including people who argue that because people don't experience dysphoria in the same way you do, they aren't trans. My biggest point is, who really cares? Seriously, who cares, and why should I care if someone who lives and experiences gender differently than I do also identifies as trans? This discourse seems very, 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 very online, yeah, and I'm not going to negate the importance of online spaces for trans folks as someone who's facilitated several of them. But I'm curious about the real-world implications and why these distinctions are so incredibly important to some people. I can't help but recognize that while some people try to make these distinctions, we are all the same in the eyes of transphobes. True. So I don't particularly see the value in fighting to make these distinctions. Is a femboy actually better at their gender because they try harder to pass, as you say? I'm confused by the point here. Most trans women who take issue with traps take issues less with the people themselves and more with the idea that trans people exist to fool and trick men. And men who are interested in trans women really don't make a huge distinction between a hyperfeminine trap and a trans woman. Like I said, this seems very online. I don't particularly have an issue with a hyperfeminine man describing themselves as some flavor of trans. I also don't have an issue with them saying they're definitely not trans. I don't really see the harm either way. So Kat took kind of an enlightened centrist position, but overall I agree with her because that's basically the points I made in my video.
I felt it was worth having a discussion on the points she raised, and as a result I made a video which I was particularly proud of. I know Kat is unpopular with a lot of political YouTubers, especially those on the right, but I commend her for having a dialogue with me. At the least, there was no ill will, at least from what I could see, no malice, and it wasn't like she misconstrued where I stand to an audience of hundreds upon thousands. Cut to last Sunday, and I received a message from a friend of mine asking to check out the latest video by Contrapoints. For those who don't know, Contrapoints, or Natalie Wynn, is considered to be one of the largest trans YouTubers on the platform, second only to Blair White in subscriber count. She's been regularly featured in mainstream news.
There's actually a really cute moment in this video where Contra actually talks about Blair White, and she says, the Blair White, the second largest trans YouTuber, is what I had in my script until she passed me in subscribers recently. So good for her, sweetie, or something like that. It's really cute. They're actually pretty close. Like, Blair White is just a shade over 900. She's over 900. Let's see. So Blair White is 906. Contrapoints has 902. So they are neck and neck. I mean, when you're in hundreds of thousands of subscribers, a difference of 4,000 subscribers is less than a day's growth. So, and they are both growing despite Contrapoints posting Cringe.
News outlets heralded as a philosopher and intellectual challenging the alt-right. Her content is mostly a combination of performance art with philosophy discussion hidden within.
So there's a lot of criticism of Contra from both the left and the right. The left tends to criticize her because she can make some somewhat tone-deaf or odd statements, and a lot of times it's just misconstruing deliberately what she says. But the right hates her because she's an outspoken trans woman who doesn't kowtow to their beliefs. And she has... I've heard from some people that she's much more liberal than she used to be. I don't know her politics. She keeps that stuff pretty close to the vest. But she kind of stays away from economic issues and focuses mostly on social issues. The 2-parter she made about the issues with capitalism notwithstanding. Oh yeah, definitely. Contra's growth is a net good. And it has to be said that, from what I understand, again, most of the hate for her is largely online, which makes sense given that she's a YouTuber.
Personal standpoint, her videos don't appeal to me. The focus on skits and thinly veiled caricatures combined with long running times really aren't my thing. But she does command a significant audience, closely reaching almost 900,000 subscribers at the time this
Over 900 now, bitch.
video goes up. Now, I was initially confused as to why I was asked to check out Contra's latest video, entitled Cringe. In her feature-length video, Contra discusses the nature of morbid cringe, first focusing on examples of what she calls empathetic cringe and contemptuous cringe on American Idol, before diving into lolcow territory by referencing Christian West and Chandler. Roughly halfway through the video though, her focus changes to what she calls in-group cringe, and she makes the following statement.
And if you take a look around trans YouTube, a lot of the biggest creators on the platform have channels basically devoted to exactly this type of cringe reaction humilitainment.
So, who does she decide to focus on? Who are these large YouTubers that dedicate themselves to humilitainment? Well, there's Calvin Garra, Blair White, and, well...
By the way, you may want to check in on your understudy Rose of Dawn.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
I mean... So what nuances did you... don't think you posted? I don't think I fully understand it either, but I got the gist of the video. So imagine being upset that a 900,000 subscriber YouTube called out my 32,000 subscriber YouTube channel. Like, I'm shocked that no one is talking about Contra platforming someone irresponsibly by talking about her. I don't think she did, by the way, but that is certainly a narrative that could be used against Contra.
In her 1 hour and 23 minute video, Contra talks at length about cringe from a seemingly neutral standpoint, but let's be clear, those 83 minutes of fabulous costumes and academic language are an excuse to do what she accuses myself, Blair, Calvin and others of doing, attacking trans people we don't like for our own personal gain. Due to the excessive length of Contra's video,
The difference is that, at least in the case of Blair White and Calvin Garra, I haven't engaged with enough of Rose of Dawn's content to know if she does the same thing. She's criticizing them for their content, not because they're trans. Calvin Garra and Blair White both criticize people because they're trans. Calvin Gar's whole shtick is going after people he claims are not authentically trans, calling them trans trenders, and how that they're a harm to the movement or some bullshit like that because they don't have the same issues he did. It's dumb as fuck. But that's what they do. Now, Rose of Dawn, from what I've seen, kind of tends to do the same thing, although she may not focus on individuals so much as just trends or what have you. But let's take a look. At 24 gigs of RAM, I don't understand why this hangs so much. Probably my CPU. So, let's see. Rose of Dawn. Okay, Pink News smears Boy George. Yaniv. Oh, yeah, she does a shitload on Yaniv. So, yeah. Aggressive trans goes viral. Trans stupid. Lib Dems deny biology and Marvel's first trans here. Oh, boy. I need to revisit her more often. She looks like a treasure trove of content. But yeah, so she does the same thing. She goes after individual trans people, and criticizes them because they're not trans enough. She's really hung up on the length of Contra's video. Like, is she implying that all good ideas fit in a 10-minute YouTube cash money algorithmic format? Yeah, Contra's whole thing is long-form videos. I mean, if we look at her channel, I don't think there's many videos under, like, 30 minutes. And to be fair, it was a very useful 83 minutes. I don't want to say dense, but I don't think there was a great deal of wasted time in diversions or jokes or anything like that. She used it to reveal her information.
I won't be addressing every point she raised, nor will I focus on ridiculous skits that would make even Doug Walker blush, but Contra misrepresented me and my channel to an audience of hundreds upon thousands, and it seems to be very telling why she did that. Before I go into detail on my issues with Contra, I want to clear up a few of the many misconceptions she made about my channel, as I'm aware this response video will no doubt attract some of her audience who are curious as to who Rose of Dawn is. Well, I started my channel in March of 2018, with a focus on discussing what I feel are issues from within the trans community. Contra acknowledged what is effectively my mission statement, but then strongly implied that my channel is instead focused on cringe content, highlighting the name of my weekly series, Trans.
So, is it me, or is this audio not matched up at all with the video? Like, I know oftentimes she records herself talking for these segments of the video, but this feels like this is another video segment that she's talking over. And it's really weird.
Stupid, the Pillars of the Community video I made on Chan, and my coverage of Jessica Yaniv to paint me as someone who focuses on mockery rather than commentary. This, of course, is hugely disingenuous. The stories I cover can vary from individual outbursts, media coverage.
Okay, I'd have to rewatch the video again, but I don't think she said that was all you do, but that is a significant portion of your content. I mean, if someone said that my content was just responding to PragerU, Sargon of Akkad, and Jubilee, I could say I do other things, but I have done those in the past. I mean, those are segments of your content, and I don't think she really implied that that was all you do. She just said those are the things you did that are problematic.
Coverage, lawsuits, all the way to government policy. Simply pointing and laughing, which is what Contra heavily implies is not what I do. And if discussion on these subjects is considered cringe to her, I would question why she doesn't point this critique at similar channels more aligned with her beliefs, as it's very telling that all three examples she provides only come from one particular outlook. Contra makes it very clear that she believes
Nice to see woke trans people speak out against how ludicrous the whole pronoun circle thing in the queer community is. My response to these has always been the same. What do you think? Grabs breasts, which always results in a mumbled she, her, then. So, oh god. For those who aren't aware, Contra responded to this tweet here with a quote tweet basically talking about how it can trigger her dysphoria to be in these hyper woke spaces and have to define her pronouns because she's a trans woman, and they think that needs to be done, even though she wants people to assume her gender because of how strongly she performs it. And it was simply this sucks for me, but it's something that I'm willing to get used to. But her language, her rhetoric, was misinterpreted by some people to be NB-phobic. And this is actually the drama that drove her off Twitter, I think, the first time. So, her whole point was that, I believe the exact line she said was, I can go to sports bar in South Carolina and be missed and mammed all night long, but I go to one hyper woke space and I have to introduce myself with my pronouns, and that triggers my dysphoria. And she said some other stuff about non-binary people and how, it helps them. And I believe she specifically used the phrase, that's super fucking hard for me, which sounds in the text of Twitter like someone being legitimately upset, but it's literally a quote from one of her videos that is used in the context of, this is something super easy, but it's super fucking hard for you. Like, it's a sarcastic statement, but people took it at face value as the text it was, because you can't denote tone in text.
Believes the highlighting of trans cringe is flat out wrong, but why does
Yeah, here's her Twitter thread. It's happened to me before in hyperwoke spaces, like it's me and a bunch of cis women. We all have to go in a circle saying she, her, because I'm there. There's this paradox where I can go to a sports bar in North Carolina and be mismammed all night, no question. But in self-consciously trans-inclusive spaces, I have to explain my pronouns and watch woke people awkwardly correct themselves every time they say you guys. I guess it's good for people who use they, them only and want only gender-neutral language, but it comes at the minor expense of semi-passable transes like me, and that's super fucking hard for us. This tweet right here got her so much shit. Because she said, I know that this is good for they, them only, for non-binary people who want gender-neutral language. And this is something that I've noticed a lot in online discourse. People like PhilosophyTube, Ollie Thorne, people like Natalie, Contrapoints, people like Vosh, they talk about things as they apply in the real world, our imperfect world that we're trying to change, and the effects they have. And people like, to a lesser extent, Rose of Dawn, but there's a number of these people on Twitter and social media, pretty much exclusively there, YouTube, who like to talk about, who like to interpret these things in the ideal world they're trying to create. I just don't have an opinion on this. I don't feel comfortable invalidating Contra's lived experience or a description of it, and I also see how it could be cringe from the perspective of NB's. Yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to say here is that Natalie was saying, hey, I understand why this is, and I understand why it's helpful. Just understand that sometimes it can be an issue for people like me, people like Contrapoints, and it's a minor expense, and that's super fucking hard for us. This is literally a quote from one of her earlier videos that is in the context of, hey, I need you to get some milk from the fridge. That's super fucking hard for me. I don't remember the exact context, but that's basically what it was. It was some minor inconvenience, and the person was whining about it. That is what she said here. But again, because you can't convey tone, because you can't convey anything deeper than the words on the page, people took this as her saying, but this comes at a minor expense from semi-passable transes like me, and that's just super fucking hard for us. Like, she was unironically saying it was super hard, and that was not what she was conveying. And this caused all sorts of dog piles. She got harassed, and This is part of what apparently led to her dropping into something of an alcoholic, depressive episode, but she seems to be doing better now. And better than ever, really. The last couple of videos have been really good. Dr. Rick Bright, the ousted director of a key federal office charged with developing medical countermeasures to warn the U.S. will face unprecedented illness and fatalities without additional preparations. Good to know, Rocket Morton. From what I understand, that is true. Good to know. Thank you.
Does she feel so strongly about it? Well, it can be summed up in one word. Cope.
Oh boy. Please tell me how Contra is coping and with what.
Contrapoints is someone who is a textbook definition of a gender radical. For those not familiar with this phrase, it can be summed up in the 5 following points. A gender radical is someone who believes there are many genders. Biological sex is a construct. Smash the binary. Don't assume someone's gender. And all of this is accompanied by left.
This is a very, what do I want to say? Unnuanced way of looking at modern gender theory and the way sociologists look at gender. This means that most sociologists are gender radical. And to be clear, Contra's views on gender are pretty radical for the average person. But what Rose of Dawn seems to be doing here is trying to conflate Contra's views of gender, or trying to say that Contra's views of gender are way out there and a fringe belief, instead of the accepted standard of biology, sociology, of science. Also, we have this little biological sex as a construct. No, gender is a social construct. Biological sex is not as important as people think it is. This is not a statement anyone follows. Looks like she took an undergrad gender studies course, and the test question was define gender radicalism, and this is what she put. She got a B- on the test. Yeah, probably.
Left-wing politics. Now, Contra easily fits into each of these definitions. Of course, if she believes she doesn't, then I welcome her to openly distance herself from any one of these points, although she's no doubt aware.
I feel like I'm pushing the limits of cis toleration and understanding as is by being so forward about the feminine penis aspect. But it seems like a lot of trans people want me to push it even further to hairy tops not on hormones can be women too, which, yes, they can. Yeah, this is again, Contrapoints is trying to appeal. Contrapoints has often been called the Chud Whisperer because she was so good at drawing normies in. I mean, Contrapoints was part of my radicalization, my pathway to the left, along with Sean, and eventually Vosh, but Natalie's videos, because they are mini movies, in some cases not so mini movies, and they are very well produced, very high quality, very good information, and she uses terms and language that appeal to regular people. So this is why what she's saying here is that there's a number of trans people in the trans community who want her to push it all the way forward and say in her videos, yes, hairy tops not on hormones can be women too. Yes, they can. They can be women. But her point is that if she goes forward with that, she turns off a lot of the people she brought in with her somewhat milquetoast talking about feminine penis. Why is no one talking about the mouthfeel?
Of the consequences from her own fan base. As a gender radical, Contrapoints supports ideas such as self-identification and is firmly opposed to medical gatekeeping. These are issues I've discussed extensively in other videos, and to go into detail here would detract from this video. But radical trans and gender politics can have terrible results, so how do you address it? Maybe reevaluate your beliefs and policies? Well, that requires too much work. Alternatively, let's shut down.
What real-world issues do they have other than preventing young trans people from committing suicide? Please explain. Because typically what they talk about is biological men taking over women's sports, which just hasn't happened. There's a few high-profile instances of trans women doing well in, trans men doing well, no, yeah, I had it right. Trans women doing well in women's sports. And the infamous case of the UFC fighter who broke a woman's skull. Are you telling me that no one in the UFC has ever accidentally broken someone else's skull? Like, it sounds to me like there was an issue in weight classification or something. Right? Isn't UFC broken up in weight classifications? Weight divisions? Or is it all just all against all? Yeah, UFC has weight divisions. So if the trans woman who broke her opponent's skull was in the same weight and had been on hormones for a while, then they should have been equally matched. So it sounds like there was just some, mistake in the fight. But they love to go back to this. They love to go back to... I remember in Sargon and Vosh's debate, Sargon just kept saying, broke a woman's skull. Broke a woman's skull when they got onto the trans women in sports debate. Because it's like the one example they can go back to of someone being seriously harmed by a trans woman in their sport. Regardless, I don't think we should base our rules about sex and athletics based on performance in barbaric blood sports. True, Magmill, true.
Down any debate and pretend it doesn't exist. This is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes throughout history, which is where the term political correctness originates. Where the socialist or communist policy failed, they couldn't acknowledge it. It wasn't politically correct.
Wait, are you claiming political correctness is a socialist policy? Because I remember political correctness being all the rage in the 90s in fucking America. There was the movie Political Correctness University making fun of it in the early 90s. In fact, I was confused when I kind of checked back into the zeitgeist and saw that they were all talking about SJWs and no one was talking about political correctness anymore. And I realized that it was all terms for the same thing. Just nobody talked about political correctness. It was all about SJWs and their agenda.
That's the true definition of the phrase, not, as it's widely assumed, to be nice, inclusive, and polite. Political correctness is about refusing to acknowledge reality and the undeniable results of a bad policy. My content, along with...
Holy shit. No? I mean... Okay, yes, sometimes political correctness can be used to deny reality. That is why it has such a backlash against it. One of the reasons. But generally, political correctness is just part of fucking liberal tone policing. Don't blame this on us. This is all about making sure that everyone is civil and no one gets hurt. That's what political correctness is about. And it's good in its place, but it can be taken to extremes. Jesus Christ.
Blair, Calvin, and countless other trans content creators highlight the flaws, failures, lies, and absurdities of radical gender politics. This is and always has been the core focus of my channel, and my content is much more difficult to dismiss than, say, a cis commentator talking about the same issues, because the label of transphobic bigot doesn't stick as easily on a trans person. Your average...
Yes, it does. I mean... To people who actually care about transphobia, they recognize that trans people can be just as transphobic as non-trans, as cis people. Sorry, I know you like to pretend that way. I know that is Calvin Guerra and Blair White's whole shtick. You can't call me transphobic. I'm a trans woman. You're still transphobic. Sorry. Not sorry.
Viewer might go along with it if you label Sargon of Akkad as a transphobe, but place it on a trans person like Blair immediately makes one question the assertion. Contra, on the other hand, avoids criticism of gender radical doctrine. The few times she's made comments questioning it have resulted in a harsh backlash, forcing her to step down. For example, her critique of the need to ask for pronouns at the end of August 2019 ended with her leaving Twitter after
I love how she's showing like 10 tweets talking shit about Contra and ignoring all the various high tweets in support of her, because it really was a truly contentious issue. And one of the big issues was that people like this anime avatar right here, they were piling on the discourse, the arguments against her, and the people who had real criticisms of her got drowned out. So it's one of the problems with Twitter, to be honest, is that it can be hard to separate the honest criticism from people just dogpiling on you, particularly when you're a 900,000 sub YouTuber with that kind of following and anti-following.
She was accused of prejudice against non-binary people. Contra has regularly been attacked by her own audience for airing a view that isn't quite kosher, and always issues an apology against the hate mob rallying against her. So what's the alternative if criticism is verboten? Well, she needs to cope. A cope is the action of dishonestly avoiding a debate you find yourself losing, which you know there to be valid concerns, but you want to conceal them anyway. An example of a modern—
What? Boy, we're just redefining terms all fucking over today. I've never heard cope used in quite that context. I know I've seen it used when someone just backs out of a debate or something and says, well, I just believe this. Cope. I mean, giving her the benefit of the doubt that she means this is one of many definitions, sure. But, no. Okay, please explain how Contra is coping.
Modern cope is the narrative of the British Labour Party. Shortly after their recent election defeat, Labour's former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, proclaimed that Labour won the argument and that the public was on their side. Now, judging from the results of that election, this is clearly untrue, as it was Labour's worst defeat since the 1930s. But the Labour Party and their supporters dismiss this by pointing to their engagement on social media, or they attempt to take credit for the steps the British government are currently taking in the coronavirus pandemic, which is an unprecedented national emergency. Raising these points only serves as a deflection from the failures they don't want to address. A cope can be broken down into 5 steps, as seen in this slide. Number 1. Try to ward off even discussing the issue in the first place. Number 2. Deny the issue exists, downplay its significance or scope, find ways to explain it away as nothing out of the ordinary. Number 3. Try to reverse the issue back on the person who raises it. This is a you problem. Number 4. Accept the issue exists, but then try to point out some other casual factor which minimizes—
Jesus. It's causal factor, and this can be a legitimate argument. Accept that the issue exists, but then try to point to some other causal factor which minimizes and normalizes the issue. Yeah, this could be a legitimate argument.
And normalizes the issue. Number 5. Finally, when all else fails, resort to the complex and claim the issue is so irreducibly complex that we'll never understand it. So now we all know what a cope is. Let's examine some of Contra's arguments and see whether she falls into any of the aforementioned categories. Number 1. Try to ward off even discussing the issue in the first place. Almost all of Contra's segments on me falls directly into this category, as she directly and purposefully misrepresents me. As I mentioned earlier, she dismissed the idea that my channel looks into meaningful trans politics by focusing on the amount of videos I made on Jessica Yaniv. She was also critical because I made a video on Chris Chan back in August last year, telling her audience I did so because Chris is a bad transgender.
There is a bad transgender in our midst. The bad transgender is not a real transgender like me. I'm getting pretty tired of this.
Anyone who watched it would know that this wasn't the purpose of the video, but rather an in-depth look at a notable and highly chronicled internet personality to determine whether or not Chris is actually trans. And despite the abundance of Chris-chan related online content, this was the first video, as far as I know, to approach the subject in a sensitive manner.
Hey Baron Tired, thanks for the follow, appreciate it.
Side note, Contra's understanding of the Chris-chan phenomenon is weak at best. For example, she compared Gino Samuel, the creator of an entire series chronicling Chris's history, to A-Log, one of the notorious Chris-chan trolls. This lack of nuance resulted in some of Contra's fans targeting Gino's Patreon page, accusing him of being a cyberbully, which Gino responded to by pointing out that he regularly chats with Chris directly about the videos. On a more personal note, Contra misrepresents me again when she shows clips of me talking about transition and appearance before going on the attack. The context of these clips are completely lost in Contra's video. For example, the references to the seals in the transition video and the stream I had with Blair and Mars where I talked about appearance are not aimed at being shady to non-passers. Rather, I'm talking about the importance of not surrounding yourself in a hug box in your early transition and to be realistic in your appearance. That way, you can take honest steps to improve it. By misrepresenting me in this way, Contra was able to ward off actually acknowledging and discussing the problem in the first place, and this is a general reflection on her content, as she prefers not to discuss the negative results of her politics, as opposed to being honest and trying to fix them. Number 2. Deny the issues exist, downplay its significance or scope, find ways to explain it away as nothing out of the ordinary. Shortly before Contra starts her segment on me, she highlights Blair's video on trans predators. As you'd expect, Contra dismisses Blair's content as simply ways of making money, but take a look at this joke that she plays several times.
Vanessa made a few more videos about Yaniv, rebranding herself as a kind of transsexual Chris Hansen, exposing transgender predators wherever she could find them.
Trans predators, with a siren and flashing imagery. By doing this, Contra is knowingly
People like Blair White and Rose of Dawn definitely gave Jessica Yaniv way more press than she needed. It was literally just because she is a bad trans that Blair White and Rose of Dawn focused on her so much. Like, you want to talk about how Contra misrepresented your videos? Let's take another gander at your videos, shall we? Talking about real issues, you claim. That's the bulk of your content. So, let's see. We have... Okay, explaining femboys. Given the content from this video we watch on stream, I'm going to assume that this is also going to be not a real issue. This very well may be a real issue. I don't know about Pink News smearing Boy George, but, you know. Yaniv strikes again. What's a trans activist? This one could be a real issue, sure. This one definitely wasn't. Another Yaniv video. This one could be a real issue video. So in the last month, let's just go back. Everything released 1 month ago. How to effing transition? I'll give her the benefit of the doubt on that one. The rose pill? No. So we've got no, maybe, no, maybe, no, yes, no, maybe. Yeah, you make such important content, Rose of Dawn. You're such an important voice in the trans community online.
Explaining away and downplaying very real concerns that Blair has brought up in her videos. This is also reflected in Contra's dismissive comments on the amount of videos I've made covering Jessica Yaniv. She seems to make quite a bit of effort to be seen as condemning Yaniv in her video, so she's clearly aware of what he's being accused of, but by focusing on the number of videos, she seeks to downplay the significance of what Yaniv has done by painting it as obsessive. So I'd like to...
Yes, Yaniv did some shitty shit, and may very well be a predator. But by making 20 fucking videos about her, you are obsessing over someone who is not really doing a whole lot to harm trans people. Because, again, her shittiness is not a reflection of her trans identity. It's just a reflection of her being a shitty fucking person. And for those who are somehow unaware of Jessica Yaniv, Jessica Yaniv is a trans woman from Canada who has gained some notoriety online for being quite litigious in regards to her gender. She complained to, I believe, WordPress and got a blog shut down that misgendered her. The blog was otherwise pretty turfy, so that might actually have been a good thing to get taken down, but she did that. And the main thing she's allegedly done is she went into a salon to get waxed and sued the salon when they refused to wax her genital area, given that she still has a penis. The issue is not that she has a penis, the issue is that the salon wasn't equipped to or trained to wax male genitalia. There are salons you can go to for that and wax penises, but there are salons you can go to for that, but, you know, the one she went to wasn't, and she sued them and lost. Moreover, she has posted some kind of yikesy stuff about wanting to spend time with young girls and talk to them about their period, and she's very focused on menstruation and periods and the like. So there definitely seems to be something a little weird about Jessica Yaniv and her predilections. But again, this is not a reflection of her being trans, it's just a reflection of her being a fucked up human being. But people like Blair White, and seems to be Rose of Dawn, are focusing on her issues as a trans woman and trying to link that. And this is what happens when you remove the medicalist language from the trans identity. If you have to have dysphoria, then of course Jessica Yaniv isn't trans, but she is. She identifies authentically as trans. So, at least as far as we can tell, she is, as far as we are aware, living her life as a woman. So she is trans. That doesn't mean she's not a shitty human being.
Put a question to Contrapoints. What is the correct amount of times one should talk about a trans predator? When women are raped by a trans woman who is allowed into a women's jail, when a student officer with access to vulnerable people faces serious allegations of sexual misconduct.
But you're not talking about those people for 20-odd videos. You're talking about Jessica Yaniv because this is, in your mind at least, a slam dunk case of a trans trender taking advantage of politically correct media. And it's not. She's a trans woman who's got some problems and is hopefully getting help for them. But you and Blair White, probably Calvin Gara, keep hammering on her about it, and so it keeps that fresh.
When a genital-obsessed racist can damage and end the careers of 12 immigrant women, how many videos is okay? The implication here is that the number of times to draw attention to a predator who is yet to face justice is 0, as to do so is to create cringe content.
No, sweetie, no. No, it's not 0. But it's not 20. Okay? Unless there is new information. That's the real issue, is that this is all just rehashing the same shit or talking about the same behavior. We know she's a problem, but there's especially for right-wing YouTubers, there's a large audience for seeing the bad transes. And that's why you keep making these videos. Don't pretend that you're trying to bring attention to a bad person doing a bad thing. You're trying to bring attention to a bad trans person doing a bad thing and trying to say that it's society run amok. Don't give me that bullshit.
Content. Number 3. This is a you problem. Of the 5 cope strategies, this is the one that is featured most prominently in Contra's video. Every allegation she makes against myself, Blair and Calvin can be thoroughly summarised as projection. So where do I begin? Well, let's start with appearance. I previously mentioned how Contra misconstrued some of my transition quotes, which is something she weirdly focused on in a synthwave clip, the purpose of which isn't entirely clear to me. However, sometimes I do point out appearances, and part of Contra's cope is making it look unreasonable and weird for people to point out extremely non-passing trans people, or people who deliberately make sure they don't pass. Or zero effort non-transitioning non-binaries. It is not unreasonable because it's relevant. It's not unreasonable to be concerned when someone very obviously male wants to enter a women's changing room or win a women's sports contest. These are the results of Contra's no gatekeeping policy.
Okay, this is from January of 2019, so a year and a half ago. I'm pretty hesitant to clarify my own views or address rumors, since in the past that's only made things worse for me, but it really never hurts to say, you don't need to be on hormones to be a trans woman, you don't have to pass, you don't have to be a bottom. But when you're in conversation with straight men who think men who like trans women are, in virtue of that fact, gay, I think it helps to start with examples of trans women that they're likely to find comprehensible from the cis point of view. Yes, I feel like I'm pushing the limits of cis toleration and understanding as is by being so forward about the feminine penis aspect, but it seems like a lot of trans people want me to push it even further to hairy tops not on hormones can be women too, which, yes, they can. But in view of the fact that most cis people don't really view any of us as women, I'm not sure that's the place to start, rhetorically speaking, but I'd be genuinely happy to be proved wrong. Exactly, as I've said before, her arguments, her rhetoric are to appeal to the vast majority of people who don't understand trans people. So if she starts talking about how, this is a legitimate trans woman,
And when someone
or this is a trans person, or this is a trans woman, or I want that fuck. When she starts making that argument, you lose a lot of people. So it's better to talk about people like Contra, like Blair White, like Buck Angel, who clearly, who are binary, who represent the cis expectations of gender. Because once you get on board with that and you explain to them that, yes, identifying as a gender other than your own, then you can start talking about these people. But this is one of those things where we're talking about real world appeal versus people trying to, by sheer force of will alone, create the world they want to live in.
Very obviously male wants to enter a women's changing room or win a women's sports contest. These are the results of Contra's no gatekeeping policy.
Yeah, this is getting pretty cringe.
Where a hairy, non-transitioning top is just as valid as any other woman. When Contra says everyone is valid, this is who you have to call she or be fired. So no, it's not a me thing or a mean thing to point out that having no standards results in these people being women and getting a place on women's shortlists. It's notable that Contra doesn't want you looking at the inevitable, currently happening results of an open border approach to trans politics. However, Contra does make some
What exactly are you referring to? This is something right-wingers do. They just gesture vaguely at hypocrisy or at some undefined bad thing to show why something is bad when they don't have an actual argument. Because you've only got a couple high-profile incidents to go with, and none of them really disprove the idea that gender is a social construct. It's just some people are better at performing it than others, and some people just respond to hormones differently. Who is that Olympic athlete who was disqualified because she's a cis woman and she tested too high for testosterone? Cis woman tested too high for testosterone. Caster Semenya, yes. This is a cis woman. This person right here. She is not trans. She was born a woman. She was assigned female at birth. She is not taking any hormones. She has too much testosterone to compete in women's sports, according to recent changes in the rules. So do you see why gender being a spook is kind of an issue? This is why anyone can identify as whatever gender they like. For sports are a weird thing because they've been just traditionally segregated by sex, and we're seeing that there's some issues with that all of a sudden. Maybe we should change that too.
Personal comments on my own appearance. For example, she brings up my logo as how I want to present myself.
Well, Rose, who prefers to represent herself with this cartoon. Okay.
This was an observation that was as interesting as it is incorrect. The logo in question was a piece of fan art that one of my viewers made for me.
So, I'm pretty sure this was in reference to the idea of an idealized version, like, okay, this is fan art, whatever, but you're using it to represent yourself. This is your logo. This is the image you want people to think of when they think of you. How is that any different from the GameStop trans person or any of the other examples you've used here who may view themselves as, you know, a perfect, pretty princess woman, but, you know, that's not what they look like on the outside. It's trying to demonstrate your own hypocrisy here. Also, Contra actually went over the cringe of the GameStop trans person. I'm curious if Rose of Dawn is going to touch on that, because she explains all this.
After sharing it with my followers online, as well as showing my friends outside the internet, it proved to be so popular that I just had to use it. Yes, it is flattering.
Yeah, it's a really good piece of art, and it shows you very flatteringly, but not what I would call super accurately. Which is her whole point. This is an idealized version of you. But it's okay for you to do it, but not okay for other people to do it. That's her issue. That's where she's calling you a hypocrite. She's not saying you're a fat, ugly cow who shouldn't use this image. She's saying this is not what you actually look like, so you are presenting an idealized version, an inauthentic version of you, but criticizing other people who do the same thing. This is the hypocrisy.
But you can look at that picture and clearly recognize it as me. But this logo is not, and never has been, how I present myself. The vast majority of my content is filmed in front of a camera. This has always been a personal choice, as I wanted everyone to see the woman making the content in front of them. I wear minimal makeup, and the only filter I ever use is to fix the lighting in post-production, which is needed when one uses Vegas Pro, as the picture can be too dark otherwise. I also use a photo of myself as my channel's thumbnail on YouTube, my Patreon page, and Twitter. Me, as you see me, is how I present myself. And this jab at my appearance and how I see myself is fascinating coming from Contrapoints. She is most famous for her varied costumes, heavy makeup, lighting and filters, which she uses a variety of in every video she produces. In her latest Cringe video, she has 3 different costumes, each with heavy makeup. There's nothing wrong with this, she has a distinctive style, but it becomes...
I think we have vastly different opinions of what heavy makeup is, because she's definitely wearing makeup here, but it's the kind of light makeup that an actor wears to make their face look good on camera. This is not caked on makeup. I mean, the ringleader makeup, yeah, that was heavy makeup deliberately. She even wore some fucking contacts to make her eyes look wild. But no, this is not heavy makeup. This is the touched up version of what Contra looks like normally.
Becomes a problem when she accuses me of presenting my logo as how I want to be seen, whilst she in turn looks nothing in reality like she does in her videos.
But she doesn't criticize people for how they look. Last time, that's the difference. That's the hypocrisy.
This is a clear projection here. Both Contra and myself have gone through facial feminization surgery. Despite the painful recovery, I've been thoroughly satisfied with the results I've achieved, and I've never felt better in my own appearance. Contra, on the other hand, has talked at length about how she hasn't been happy with hers.
I've been kind of depressed this past month, and I think part of it is that on a subconscious level, I think I was hoping that surgery would completely change my self-image and make me like myself. But it really hasn't. I mean, I'm happy with the results, I'd do it all again, but I still feel the way I felt before.
Now, I don't cake myself in makeup, filters and elaborate dresses to disguise how I actually look. I might not look perfect.
I'm betting that you are wearing just as much makeup here as Contra was in that Uwu t-shirt. You both got lipstick on. I'll bet there's some foundation or some shit here. Doesn't really look like you've got any eyeliner or anything on, but yeah, I'm betting you're wearing the exact same amount of makeup, or very similar amounts.
I certainly have flaws, but I'm confident enough in my appearance that I don't disguise it. I cannot say the same about her, and this leads into a more significant projection Contra makes, which is how we feel internally about the presentation of trans people in the public eye, and a focus on self-hate. Contra alleges that Calvin Garra projects his hatred of transgenders onto the public, implying he believes it is because of multi-gendered NBs that there is a dislike of trans people in society. She also accuses me and Blair,
Vanessa,
of presenting ourselves as the good trans, with
I'll be honest, that was a little weird that she constantly referred to Blair White as Vanessa in the video. And I know that they have had a prior relationship. I think they were friendly at some point. But yeah, it's kind of weird. It was kind of weird. Kind of a power move, actually.
Yaniv being the bad trans. All of this Contra clearly states as us projecting our insecurities onto the world, therefore being instantly dismissive of what our critiques actually are. This is an us problem, apparently. For clarity, no. Transgenders or Jessica Yaniv aren't the reason why people may have a problem with trans people in general, but this doesn't mean there's nothing worthwhile to critique here. In the case of a transgender, they push the narrative you don't need to have gender dysphoria in order to be trans. These are the same people who push for medical organizations to demedicalize transsexualism.
Yes, this is the understanding of science. It's not trenders. You are literally denying science to require dysphoria to be trans. You're invalidating a number of people, and yeah, you're just wrong here, Rose. Sorry.
Aware or simply not caring about the impact this would have on the trans people who require specific treatments for their dysphoria, such as hormones or surgeries. They are listened to by those in influential positions to our detriment, so it's right to critique them. Likewise, Yaniv isn't an excuse for someone to dislike all trans people or generalise that we're all similar to him. But the Yaniv case, and why I talk about it so much...
Notice the just casual misgendering. This is the kind of thing... Again, Jessica Yaniv is a piece of shit, but as far as we can tell, she is authentically trans, so you're just being unnecessarily shitty by misgendering him. Her, excuse me. And... let's see what her reason is for constantly covering Yaniv, because it can't be that there's that much new information about her case.
Is that it's the end result of narratives that people like Contrapoints push. The infamous ball waxing case is a perfect example of radical gender ideology taken to its logical conclusion. The only criteria to being a woman is simply to define as such.
Except that every so-called gender radical I know of on the internet roundly condemned Yaniv for this. No one defended her doing this. No one said that this was okay. So you're trying to say that gender radicals think that this is what should happen, but no gender radicals defended her doing this. And all of them I saw talked about how if you don't have a vagina, you need to make sure that if you're going to get it waxed, that they're okay with waxing penises or waxing scrotums, because that's what you have. Like, this is, you can deny reality all you want, but if you want reality to act on you, you have to accept it exists.
Sex is a construct,
Shouldn't anyone who feels like the label fits be able to be trans, or am I missing something about how people who aren't attractive calling themselves trans hurting the movement or something? Yeah. Anyone who feels like they identify as a gender other than what they were assigned at birth is trans, but a lot of the Calvin Gara and Blair White and Rose of Dawn rhetoric is how these unattractive, unpassing people aren't authentically trans. Like, you have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars of surgery before you're authentically trans. They'll deny that, but it seems to be a common theme.
After all, so Yaniv's genitals, to remain consistent with gender radical ideology, become female by definition. This was how Yaniv was able to raise the cases in the first place. Ultimately, creators like myself highlight people like Yaniv as they take advantage.
There's a hair more nuance to it than that, Magmill, but yeah, that's basically what it boils down to.
Of narratives pushed by the likes of Contrapoints, using loopholes and self-ID policies for personal protection. Contra doesn't have an honest answer to any of this though. Instead, she accuses us of self-loathing. I've discussed the toxic narrative of self-loathing in the past. As a trans woman who is considered true scum, as someone who sits on the political right, such accusations come with the territory. I should make it clear that I started my transition back in 2010. Since then, I've had various medical procedures, including hormone replacement therapy, gender reassignment surgery, and facial feminization surgery. At this point, I consider myself fully transitioned. I feel no internal shame with who I am. And it's important to note by comparison, Contra is still fairly early in her transition, which only began in earnest around 2 years ago. Transition is a big deal, and it's understandable that someone still in the early days will be having mixed, even negative, feelings about the process. This isn't a defense for her dishonesty by projecting onto me, but it could be an explanation. But the accusations of self-loathing, the way Contra stresses we are abused and stigmatized by society, feel very much like she's projecting her own insecurities onto us as a way of explaining our positions. She's been very public with her own issues, even bringing them up in this very video. She openly mentions how cringing is a habit that makes her hate herself and projects this directly onto me. She talks about how all trans people are victims of harassment and hate. And yes, I'm sure the vast majority of trans people have indeed experienced some form of prejudice, but this doesn't mean our behaviours are controlled by it, or that we think less of ourselves as a result. It's a convenient tool to simply bat away any and all criticism we bring as being motivated.
Okay, that's the second time she just brought up Yaniv's picture to try to counter Contra's point. And Contra's point is typically about how the experience the vast majority of people have. Like, especially in America, most people don't have the money to have the kind of transitions that Contra and Rose of Dawn have gone through. So the best they can do is maybe get on some hormones and dress differently. And they may not even be able to get on hormones because that shit can be expensive. And most insurance doesn't cover it. So what she's trying to do is create this greater acceptance for trans people and to destigmatize non-passing trans people so that we can they experience greater acceptance in real life. Yeah. She's temporally early, yes. She didn't start transitioning until like 2017. But she was fortunate in that her YouTube channel took off so much that she's been able to comfortably afford the kind of transition that it apparently took Rose of Dawn 10 years to do. Like, this is one of those situations where Rose of Dawn is trying to pull rank because she's been transitioning for 10 years, and Contra didn't realize it until like 2016, 2017 that she was even trans, and then was able to pretty rapidly transition from there. Yeah, Contra is fucking, like, I don't know if she still has them up, but a lot of her early videos, like, I know this is weird to talk about. She was a hot dude. And then she started to transition, and now she's a hot woman. So, you know, she has transitioned just about as much as Rose of Dawn has. I assume Rose of Dawn has gotten bottom surgery. I don't know. I don't care. I guess Contra hasn't. I don't know. I don't care. But the point is that for literally every situation except sleeping with them, they present as women. And if you get them naked, I mean, they'd look mostly woman too.
By an internal disgust for ourselves. It gives the impression that there is one true way of thinking for a trans person, but based on a reaction, I'm not sure Contrapoints quite understands this. Number 4, accept the issue exists, but then try to point.
It shouldn't be weird. Anarcho-syndicalism is the most sexual identity secure anarchist movement. Everybody knows that. True! Yep, absolutely, Magmill.
Point to some other casual factor which minimizes and normalizes the issue. When discussing both Chris Chan and Yaniv, Contra brings up the issue of mental health. It's absolutely right to acknowledge Chris's autism, and in fact this is something many who follow him openly understands to give context to what he does. With Yaniv, however, it's a little less clear. Unlike Chris, Yaniv hasn't really discussed in public whether or not he has any diagnosed conditions. It may be the case that he does, but there could be other explanations for his behaviour. It could be a grift, or motivated by a fetish, or related to racism. But bringing up the casual factor of mental health doesn't take away the issues which Yaniv brings up. Yaniv was able to get people banned and censored because of the zero gatekeeping policies, and the radical trans policies that activists push into Twitter. Yaniv's mental issues may have made him take the path, but radical trans activists opened the door in the first place. As for the final cope, when all else fails, resort to the complex.
So wait. I don't recall Contras going too deep into Yaniv's sexual issue. It was just... whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that you're harping on about Yaniv. That was her whole argument. And as far as Chris Chan, her whole point was that the I forget what they call themselves, but the people who follow and harass Chris Chan often do so and are able to do so because of her autism, causing her to be more trusting and more naive than a person with her experience should be. That is why she brought it up. That is why it is relevant. Because it has been deliberately used by bad actors to harm her. And that is why it is something that should be addressed. Wow, this is incredibly bad faith.
And claim the issue is so irreducibly complex we'll never understand it. Let's leave this as the placeholder. I've put forth criticism of Contra's politics having bad results, and that she avoids addressing them. Whilst I'm supposedly filled with self-hatred and appeasement for the right wing, I'm sure there are very, very complex reasons for Contra to ignore.
You're telling me that you make content which appeals to right-wingers and conservatives because you earnestly believe that they have what's best for trans people at heart? Or because that's where most of the money is? Because it's just a fact that conservatives are the ones who are attacking trans rights in the US, at the very least, around the world. They use people like Blair White, like Calvin Garrett, like you, Rose of Dawn, to counter the narrative that they're transphobic or that they want to remove trans rights. No. They try to inject nuance into an issue that is actually not as nuanced. It's a reversal of the usual situation. They're trying to say, no. We don't think trans people are invalid. We just think that, only the ones with dysphoria, the ones who are actually mentally ill, and thus by using that rhetoric, they are dehumanizing and minimizing trans people in society. If you basically state that the only valid trans people are people who have a mental illness, which it's no longer considered a mental illness, but they'll still use that rhetoric, then you create a situation where the average person looks on trans people as sick people, and that this is an issue that needs to be cured or needs to be fixed. Yeah, Republicans have been the most stalwart defenders of trans people for some time, obviously. Clearly.
All the problems brought forward by her beliefs. And I look forward to the 94-minute video explaining why we're bigots for not wanting this person as a women's representative.
There's more?
I've discussed the various cope mechanisms Contra raised in her video, but there's still more to discuss outside it, and it's quite relevant to the topic of her video, which is morbid curiosity. Now, Contra talks about what she perceives as a cringe obsession between myself and Jessica Yaniv, or Gino Samuel and Chris Chan. But right in plain sight is her own obsession with one particular online personality, who she still holds a grudge with to this day.
Vanessa.
Or Blair White. Let's use her actual name here. Since debate.
Gee, I wonder why she would feel so strongly about Blair White, given that they're pretty much. So you could almost consider the Blair White to be the Joker to Contra's Batman. They're two sides of the same coin. One a right-wing grifter, the other a left-wing commentator. I mean, I suppose it may be incorrect to call Blair a grifter. I think she does earnestly believe what she says. And grifting usually implies that you're saying things you don't believe. But that would really explain why Contra goes after Blair so strongly, because they're kind of, two paths to the same road. And one is dark and evil and causes harm, and one is light and covered in pastel colors and causes much less harm.
Dating Blair back in 2017, Contra has had a notable dislike of Blair and her popularity, going so far as to create a thinly veiled parody of Blair known as Tiffany Tumbles. Contra denies that Tiffany is based on Blair, but the stark similarities haven't gone unnoticed.
The biggest clue for me that Tiffany was intended to be...
Oh, God. Tiffany probably was largely based off of Blair, but she was largely a composite of the kind of YouTuber Blair is. So, if you want to say it was just a thinly disguised Blair White, it was a very thick disguise. She could have done a lot more to really call out Blair White as Tiffany Tumbles.
Blair is the way she repeatedly mentions that she isn't a victim.
Even though I'm trans, I refuse to be a victim.
I'm not a victim.
I'm not a victim. I am in complete control.
Contra's latest video ironically highlights her dislike for Blair even further. She repeatedly refers to Blair with the condescending nickname of Vanessa, or Vanessa LeBlanc, says she has inner beauty, unlike Blair, used a part of my transition video to snipe at her, makes a dig at Blair applying lip gloss, which is hypocritical considering the makeup Contra wears. She can't even talk about me without bringing up Blair first, and it's notable how Contra's eyes light up when talking about Blair as opposed to me. Of course, Contra also makes many spurious accusations against Blair in this video, the most serious of which is that Blair had no other motivation to make any content on Yaniv other than money, and not that Blair has concerns with what Yaniv has done. It's not that Yaniv is dangerous and radical trans politics enabled him, no, it's hatred, or internal.
Okay, this is boring. Because this is all just the same bullshit over and over again. Yeah, Yaniv was not enabled by radical trans politics. If anything, she was enabled by science and sociology and took advantage of that. That's why society has to adapt to this new reality. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, Rose. We have to be willing to adapt to changes in society. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you. See you next time.